Hi everyone, welcome. What you see here are my European nightcrawler systems. These two bins are now 40 days of age. It was 40 days ago that the worms got moved out of the one box that they used to live in. And I thought that I had enough to launch off two systems, and with everyone's input we sort of came to the estimation that any one of these boxes has about 1,500 worms occupying it. And at some point soon we're going to probably have a few more to add. And that's because we held on to the castings that they used to live in, with the assumption that there were still a bunch of cocoons in there needing to hatch, and after 40 days, we've probably given sufficient time for all the cocoons to hatch and the babies to emerge. So I believe that the time has come to start rounding up the worms in this system and bringing into the cocoon nursery. So we're going to bait the babies and whatever stragglers stay behind when we did the haul out to get whatever lives in this container out of there so we can retire it. And at the same time, since it's been 16 days now since the last feeding, we've got a nice generous portion of food to give these little guys over here. I bought down a whole bunch of chopped up corn cob. This cob here I broke in half. The rest of it I cut into little discs. And then here are some green beans. And after we feed the two worm bins, I've even got a couple coffee filters here to mark where we last fed. This is the box that I thought we would use as sort of our bait box. And I got some other stuff on the sidelines, some bedding and whatever, grit, stuff to support the feeding and baiting activity. So I'm going to put on a glove and we're going to get to work. Alright, I cannot tell a lie. You caught me red-handed, or better said, blue-handed, before I said I had to put my glove on. I was already wearing my glove. I'm all set to go. So let's see here. I've got a few different coverings here. One of the coverings was just a piece of cardboard. And then over here we've got ourselves a paper towel or napkin or something. I guess it's an unfolded napkin. And then this third covering here is a clue as to what this bin used to be. And this is the bin that we used to do our pocket feedings, alternating our feeding location each time, switching corners and tracking the breakdown of the food over time. And some of the stuff they got fed was pumpkin, so there's this pumpkin stem, and man, is this thing light. Totally dried out, I guess, at this point. Alright, so as you could tell, none of these coverings are plastic, so minimum protection against drying other than just those few pieces of paper / cardboard. Now I guess here's sort of a miniaturized version of what we're going to be setting up as our bait box. And I went ahead and I even loaded up some bedding into the replacement bait box. I figured increased number of holes around the perimeter or a larger area to cover. So I thought that this could be our, at least the foundation for setting up what we're going to do. We're going to just drop it here in the middle, not even going to sink it too deep. Maybe even stir all this stuff up so this dry material on the surface even further dries the material that the worms are huddled up in, further inspiring them to come into here to get at some of the nice damp fresh bedding, as well as some of the food we're going to drop in there for them. So let's first of all finish the prep of this thing. I already put in a little bit of shredded paper and cardboard combined with some leafy material in there. So what I just sprinkled in is worm chow. I guess, you know, since these are babies, it might not hurt to also include a little bit of grit. The grit that I use is pulverized eggshell. The babies might not have grit. Now I would think that this material is full of grit. Shouldn't have to worry about that. But let's start putting in all of the tempting bits here to get them to come on over and enjoy the feast. I also don't want to create something here that's just going to be pretty much out in the air that's going to attract pests. So I guess we should cover up, put some more bedding in here. Certainly no harm in adding more bedding, right? So let's grab a little bit more here. I'm going to go to the bedding supply and top this thing off. Alright, here we go. I even snapped it shut. And it made me wonder, what do I do with all this dried out stuff? This is all totally part of the system and belongs with it. It should probably be kept together with whatever's being set up for the wormies. So why don't we just integrate? Try to jam it in here. There again, this was just stuff that we collected. It was a little bit larger types of chunk materials. I guess there might be a few worms hanging out in here too. Let's not leave them behind. You can see a little tiny tiny worm right there stuck to the bottom. So I think we've got the lion's share of what was going on in here, and I'm thinking of all these green beans, frozen veggies. I'm gonna put both snaps on now to hold this thing shut. Thinking thinking those frozen veggies in here, as they thaw, they're gonna increase the moisture content in there. That's already nice moisture content going on in here, and then hopefully this will attract the wormies out in the material. I think we already saw some kind of huddled below the box that was in here, holding some of those leftovers from the old bin. Definitely a few worms in here. I could right away see a combination in this handful after shaking the castings away. A worm that seems a little more mature, one that might have just been a straggler that didn't make it out when we did the haul out. And then the other one looked pretty puny, making me think that that one could have potentially been born in here quite some time ago, maybe early on. But I guess what we're after is little guys. And all right, wasn't expecting to take quite so much time here in the cocoon nursery. I just thought we would drop in the bait box and be on our merry way. But I definitely like the idea of incorporating this dry stuff out on the surface into the material at large. It's going to create kind of a shock to the whole system as the damp stuff down low hands off some of its moisture to the more dry material. It'll just make the entire contents of this system a whole lot inhospitable. A whole lot more inhospitable than it presently is. And I guess, you know, I wouldn't really say nothing in here seemed inhospitable to me. At least not down low. Down low it seemed nice and damp, and that's just the way castings are. So by mixing in some of the dry stuff, we didn't hardly change the moisture level of this material by much. Perhaps a little bit. Probably enough that the worms can sense the difference, right? That in itself, I wonder if that could maybe become part of their motivation to go scouting around for something better. And guess what? I'm giving them something better. How does that sound? Okay, it's kind of nice that the container's got a lid on it. On its own, it's going to maintain the moisture content. I guess it's going to air out a little bit around the edges, and maybe we can even replace one or two of the coverings that were on here just to aid in the retention of the moisture within the container. Not that I'm expecting that those few holes are going to allow for a great deal of moisture loss through evaporation, but who knows, maybe. And maybe we can just help prevent it with a couple of these more soft pieces covering things up. I guess at this point we're going to leave the cardboard covering off, and that's actually going to allow for even more drying, I think. Or who knows, maybe an inverted response or reaction. I could be completely wrong, but that's kind of what I'm after here. So let's get this thing out of the way and get the other systems fed. All right. So at 40 days of age, these systems were not the ones like where I do sometimes, where I sometimes pre-feed the system. I just created a bedding environment, and then I think I waited a week or 10 days before coming back to give them their first feeding. That's just a little different from what I did in, for example, my most recently launched bins that I launched just a day or two ago. It was in those bins that I actually did pre-feed. And you know, one of the things we could use is this cardboard top covering that we had on the cocoon nursery. Part of the bedding we apply to our feeding to complement the foods can consist of a piece of cardboard recycled from the nursery to serve as bedding here, and other stuff that we could put onto the dinner plate is this piece of top covering newspaper. I wasn't even going to try to keep that thing as one anymore because it's pretty much been nibbled away, or at least a large portion of it. And I don't even know if piling it up like this is worthwhile. Sometimes I just push it aside, sometimes I remove it, and I figured since I had this piece of cardboard in my hand, maybe we'll just remove it. Give ourselves a slightly better view of what's happening underneath the top surface bedding materials. Makes me kind of question whether we even need plastic coverings in here still. Or are we still pretty much bedding? 40-day-old bin, you wouldn't expect a lot of the bedding to be broken down, or at least not this percentage of it, but it does almost seem to me like they've already burned through. I don't know. It's hard to say. I see large distinct pieces here and there, but it's also just surrounded by tons of castings. It does almost seem to me like they've done away with at least half, if not more, of the bedding that was in this system when I originally built it. It almost makes me feel like I'm inadequately prepared to supplement bedding, although I've got a pretty good sized collection here in this tub, and we're certainly able to use as much of it as we want. I can also, in addition to that nice seasoned prepared bedding, I could just grab newspaper chunks or whatever I want. I could recycle sheets of cardboard if that's what I want. Here, 16 days later, I'm trying to remember what we fed. I think they were really scrumptious food items that probably weren't going to last very long. Stuff like strawberries and maybe cucumber peels. Yeah, those are the things that you would expect the worm bin to do away with quite quickly. We're sort of seeing the same thing that I noticed last time too. I even commented on it, how the bin just had worms in all four corners, pretty much making themselves at home everywhere. So there doesn't seem to be a particular hot spot, and after 16 days I doubt that the feeding area could be considered as a hot spot anymore. They probably came in, wiped out the food supply, and fanned back out into the material at large. So down here in the very middle, we've been circling around it, going around and around. And the one thing I do kind of expect, not leftovers of strawberry obviously, but the moisture left behind by the things that were placed in here. Most everything I feed is frozen, and as it thaws, it releases moisture. Just the breakdown process itself, I believe, also makes things gooey and release moisture and stuff like that. So that's kind of why I expected a little bit more moisture, although even here I was kind of noticing already how some of the material was starting to clump together a bit. And, you know, more so here in the center. 40-day-old bin. Geez, not even a month and a half old yet. It's got plenty of time to, you know, correct that situation, let the material flow and be more crumbly. But I think it's also an indication of how much of this stuff is already castings, kind of causing whatever remaining bits of bedding material around to draw the castings to it and clump onto it a little bit. It does feel like we should be really generous with the bedding today. So I've created a big old hole down here in the middle, and for each of these tubs I brought over a little cardboard tube that we can lay down in here, a little something for the worms to explore. And then I've got my, as I showed you earlier, wonderful pre-made bedding here. And let's not forget that really good stuff that we scraped off the top to give ourselves a nice unobstructed view. On top of all that stuff can come almost as a single item. What do you think? Should we do it? Or is that kind of weird, putting a big barrier in between the lower levels and the upper level? I think it's just going to cause the material to get broken down even more quickly, and it'll just form a big hole in the middle. What do you think? I'm going to try it. We're going to put it in as almost like just a sheet covering those two tubes and that handful of shredded material at the bottom. My only concern is coming up a little bit too high and not have enough material to cover up with at the end. So let's see here. We'll allocate one not chopped piece of the corn cob, as well as a bunch of little corn cob discs, to this feeding, along with what appears to be about one good, large, generous handful of beans, green beans, and string beans. I never know what to call these things for some reason. To me that looks like a nice feeding, one that we could even increase the appeal of by sprinkling on a little bit of worm chow. That's not bad. And here's some grit for these guys too. Very nice. And we've got our feeding zone indicator, which we'll use to show ourselves where we last fed. I'm just wondering if there's anything else we could do here. you know, instead of relying entirely on this material out here to cover up, I think I'm bringing in another handful of the prepared stuff. And we're just going to sprinkle it all over. It almost makes me feel like if I really want to shield this feeding from attracting pests, I probably don't have that much to worry about, you know, because this sort of stuff, I don't know, something about beans, I guess, and corn. I don't know if it's the sort of stuff that's going to attract pests. Oh, whatever. Lately, I've been pretty lucky to not see flying insects or big blooms of mites or, you know, any other sort of indicators of an imbalance of some sort. Well, at least not for a while now. There was the whole springtail outbreak, which I think just kind of went hand in hand with a big die-off in one of my systems recently. So I did actually see that as recently as a month ago or so. So I'm definitely not immune to the fun downturns that can happen. And I don't know, for some reason I feel like my newly topped off box of leaves can also use a little bit of attention here today. So let me go grab that, and we're going to finish up with a nice top covering of, leaves. I made a little detour on my way to get the leaves to fashion ourselves a top covering piece of newspaper. And that'll, you saw what happened to the last one. That'll just give the worms a little something to cruise around and hang out on and in and nibble on while they're in here. But we're going to put the leaves down first. I just somehow wish I had a greater amount of bedding to throw in here. And so, yeah, you saw my bedding supply. I've got it. It's right there. I just didn't really want to deplete my supply. I mean, we've still got the second tub to feed as well, and we better hang on to some leaves if we want to put leaves in there too. Let's put a few back in the box. So I'm going to have to replenish my supply of leaves too. I thought I had more, but we're doing pretty good here. Let's get this system covered up with a new top covering, and oops, I almost forgot. Got to show ourselves where we last fed using our feeding zone indicator. A nice coffee filter on top of which we can place our top covering. Oh brother, all this ridiculous tradition. I don't know. Just you're gonna get into the habit of things that seem to work pretty good and you just want to keep repeating them. Not so much maintain a tradition. So I think we're on to system number 2. Oh, I'm reminded of a comment I made during the filming of the last check-in on these systems, how this one seemed a little bit lighter somehow. I guess there's an advantage to that being the second one that might need a sort of attention that can be done not as an afterthought, but like, you know, in real time as an observation, saying, hey, maybe we need to build this system out a little bit. Here again, I don't know if I was really prepared to do that today. But maybe next time we check in, maybe we go big on bedding. I did that recently in my outdoor worm bag. We gave them a lot of bedding. We almost did sort of a whole push of the entire contents of the bag over to one edge and then build up the other half as just fresh stuff. So it was a significant increase. Here too, we got a piece of recycled top covering cardboard from the nursery that we can bring back later to complement our feeding. And I guess we'll feed down the middle again, but this time why don't we check the middle first? Sometimes I wonder if my checking of the perimeter causes them to all flee inward, and then when I go to the middle, the only reason I'm seeing a lot of worms there is because I sort of corralled them there. So here we'll get more of an undisturbed, fresh view of how the last feeding zone is doing. Oh boy, they're doing pretty good over here. So that wasn't me getting them to go down into the middle. That's just the worms hanging out in what used to be the feeding zone 16 days ago. Evidently enough moisture lingering down in there that it's causing the worms to want to come over and play around in it and enjoy it. That's very nice. Okay. And then I guess as we go around, gives us a nice opportunity just to aerate the material, get some of the more damp stuff down low mixed in with these slightly neglected bits of material drying out on the surface. A system like this I don't think has a great deal of risk in terms of, you know, developing pockets where there's no airflow. Everything feels to me very loose and airy, and luckily at the same time nice and damp too, especially the stuff at the very bottom. Even though I'm introducing stuff that's kind of dry, like those cardboard tubes, or even the worm chow, the veggies are all going to kick off moisture as they thaw, and the moisture level in here is perfectly adequate. And we're going back to covering with plastic again anyway, so we don't have to anticipate the loss of much moisture through evaporation either, because we're pretty well protected on that. But here too, I'm definitely sensing that there's just been a huge amount of consumption of bedding in here. I guess the one thing that went through my mind as I reviewed the video from our check-in here 16 days ago, holy cow. So here's some fun. It was just an observation that I think I might have even said out loud about how the material is just so full of, you know, shredded paper and cardboard and things that look like worms. You know, when it all looks like this, to have a worm or two resting alongside of it, they all kind of look alike, and you don't really get to see the worms as well until the material starts to really become dominated with a good bit of worm castings, darkening the whole thing, and then really making the visibility of the worms much greater and easier. So I'm gonna go get another, yeah, where's that newspaper? You know what? Give me a moment and we'll get these guys fed too. Yeah, you know, I thought to myself, maybe I could supplement our dwindling supply of leaves with this little supply of filtered leaves that I've got. This is just stuff that I ran through my screen so that I end up with really small stuff, no sticks. And I use that in my time lapses and other things where I want like delicate small particle matter, but I'm not gonna go that route. I'm not gonna use that. We're just gonna use what we can as far as what's left in the leaf box, and that's that. Maybe we don't get that nice forest floor bottom covering appearance, but that's okay. We'll take what we can get. Let's bring over the stuff that's gonna rest down here. I'm trying to remember, did we put anything else down there? I thought we did, but it doesn't matter at this point. It's not an exact science. This top covering piece of newspaper got pretty eaten up and beaten up, as did this feeding zone indicator, but they're definitely not getting broken down at the same pace as the other bin, because I don't think I remember seeing anything as far as leftovers of a feeding zone indicator, nor were we able to salvage pieces anywhere near that size of the top covering newspaper. So either way, things are looking pretty good down here. Maybe we can help these bits of old bedding along with a little bit of worm chow sprinkled onto them. I got a feeling next time we come back in here we're not going to see a whole lot left. And oops, I was wondering, how is it that we're not so alright, you know what, here too, I don't want to raise the level here, but we'll just sort of modify the manner in which we're putting these in. Perhaps they're not going to be like the little jungle gym for the worms to climb inside of. But it'll give us a lower profile, making it a little bit easier, I think, to fit the feeding. So let's just dump it. It almost feels like we're giving them more than the last system got. Perhaps encouraging them to increase their numbers to get caught up to the other bin. It also makes me feel like I want to put in a whole bunch of bedding just to cover all this stuff up. So why don't we do that? And besides the bedding, well, I've not yet dropped it yet. We can give a little treatment of grit to help with the digestion process, and here too a little bit of worm chow, and perhaps we even get a second handful here just to see if we can bring the level up a little bit in here. This stuff's got a nice moisture content to it. I think the worms are going to appreciate it. Maybe they'll move right in. And Then we can start bringing in a little bit of the broken down material from the surrounding edges to give the whole thing a sort of lived-in appearance. Here and there you could break a little chunky stuff up while you're at it, but probably not so important at this point. Oh, did we explore this edge? I don't remember seeing so many worms. Maybe we just kind of glossed over it, or maybe there again, maybe I corralled them over there, trying to get away from my overly enthusiastic approach to handling them. So I'm going to start using some of these top covering items to make sure I'm not taking any little wormies along for the ride and having them drop to some dry and deadly place where they're going to be out of reach of help, and perhaps even, you know, perhaps right there, right within reach and within view, but if I don't notice them, I can't help them. So try to be a little proactive, make sure I don't end up littering the floor with wormies so they could just dry up there. And then, as we did before, giving this system a nice little top covering as well as its plastic top covering to lock in the moisture. So I like the way these systems are looking. I like the color change. I think that's the part I like best. Something about those first few feedings in a worm bin, when everything looks alike, even the worms blend into the bedding. It's like, oh, I can't wait to get to that point where I can see the worms in their system again. All right, everyone. That's it for today's check-in. Hopefully you enjoyed our little visit in on the 40-day-old worm bins, as well as the cocoon nursery. We're going to try to round up worms, and hopefully we'll be able to snatch some out of that system soon, and maybe even call the remaining compost that surrounds the bait box as depopulated. So we'll see how that turns out next time, and hopefully we'll see you back here then. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks so much for watching. Bye now.